thank you everyone for joining us for tonight for August's Northwest Indiana Green Drinks. We're joined tonight by Christian Bako from the EPA Region 5 Great Lakes to present on the Grand Calumet River project that the EPA is working on. Thank you for joining us here on Zoom and soon on Facebook Live. And our event tonight is co-sponsored by the Michigan City Sustainability Commission, plus supported by Northwest Indiana Region Resilience. Guest hosts this month are 95.1 FM and AM and 1420 WIMS, 219 Green Connect, and of course the EPA and US Steel. So I'll hand it over to you, Christian, and get it started, and we'll go from there, okay?
Awesome. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for having me, and everybody for being here. I'm really excited to share some details with you about the work the Great Lakes Legacy Act through the Great Lakes National Program Office is doing in Northwest Indiana and the Grand Calumet River area of concern. And so this is on the slide here. The dashed outline is the area of concern, and here is the East 5 Miles project area, right next to US Steel Gary Works and the Marquette Park Lagoons. And we'll zoom in on the project area in a little bit more detail, but and I'll explain what an area of concern is as well as we get into it. But like the name of the project implies and the name of the presentation, the project's taking place in the eastern 5 miles of the Grand Calumet River, and does include the Marquette Lagoons. We're still very early in the process for this project, but we're excited to share some information about it and where we've been and where we're going and what we're looking at for the future phases of work. So I'm actually going to turn my camera off as I proceed through so I can kind of look at both my screens here. So I'll move on to the outline about what I'll be presenting today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Great Lakes Legacy Act and the project background, why we're focused on sediment specifically. This is a sediment remediation project, and get into kind of the AOC, the area of concern, a little bit more broadly, and the Grand Calumet River Eastern 5 Mile project details, kind of the background and overview, and then get into the nitty-gritty about the field investigation work, kind of the sampling efforts that are taking place over the past couple summers, the work products resulting from those investigations and how we use them to make remediation decisions. And then the next steps, we'll take a look at the kind of where we've been, the retrospective timeline of the project, and take a look ahead to what's in store, and then a little bit of information about how to stay updated and involved with the project into the future. And then if we've got some time, some discussion and Q&A. So first, a little bit about the Great Lakes National Program Office, co-located with EPA Region 5 in Chicago. We call it GLENPO up here. And then we implement a lot of sediment remediation projects throughout the Great Lakes Basin through the Great Lakes Legacy Act. And the Legacy Act program is a bit unique within the federal government. It was designed to accelerate the pace of sediment remediation projects in the Great Lakes, and it's been pretty successful at doing that. It's unique because it's voluntary. It's a voluntary program where non-federal sponsors enter project agreements with the EPA to share total project costs at a minimum 35%, 65% split with GLENPO. And interestingly, the University of Michigan conducted an independent study, economic impact study, that found on average there's about a 3-to-1 return on public investment where in areas where the Legacy Act and Great Lakes Restoration Initiative projects are implemented. And so that return on investment comes from things like increased property values, tourism, recreational opportunities, and things like that. But even before the Legacy Act was first authorized in 2002, there was a binational effort between the United States and Canada to protect the ecological health of the Great Lakes. And that began in 1972 when the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement was signed between the United States and Canada. And then GLNPO, the office I work for, was created in 1978 to hold up the USA's end of the bargain. And so one of the main reasons why the Great Lakes Water Quality Act was signed was to address legacy pollution, which legacy pollution is kind of a catch-all term, but consists of harmful materials or chemicals that were introduced to the environment in pretty large quantities before modern environmental regulations like the Clean Water Act were around to prevent their haphazard discharge into lakes, rivers, harbors, and bays. And legacy pollution accumulates in sediments and will, kind of the reason why it's called legacy, it'll stay there for a long period of time without breaking down if there aren't active measures taken to remove it. And, there's multiple sections of the Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement, and the first one is areas of concern, or AOCs. And those are geographic areas within the basin that have experienced significant environmental degradation due to specifically legacy pollution. And so this figure here shows the Great Lakes Basin and all the US Great Lakes area of concern. And there's some Canadian ones as well, and binational ones where right along the shared border of the United States and Canada. And AOCs, areas of concern, were designated as areas of concern if it was determined to have beneficial use impairments, or BUIs, and that's an important term. BUIs are changes in the physical, chemical, or biological integrity of the Great Lakes ecosystem. Yes, that's that last bullet here, and I'll talk a little bit more about BUIs and what they are in this next slide here. There's 14 in total, and they're listed here. I'm not going to go through each one, and not all AOCs have every BUI assigned to it, but at one point, the Grand Calumet River AOC was the only one to have all 14, but BUIs 9 and 12 were removed in March 2012 and September 2011, respectively, partly due to the work that GLNPO and the Indiana Department of Environmental Management have done together. And in order for a AOC to be considered restored and subsequently delisted, all BUIs assigned to an AOC must be removed. And so the process for doing that is shown on this figure on the right. So GLNPO works with its state and federal partners to monitor the status of beneficial use impairments, or BUIs, and states where the AOCs are located develop lists of management actions that, if completed, will contribute to removing the BUIs. And so this project, the Grand Calumet River Eastern 5 Miles project, is an example of a management action. We are planning to remediate the sediment and contribute to removing certain BUIs, and I'll list those specifically in a little bit here. And the project we're discussing today, so after management actions are taken, further monitoring takes place to assess their impact, and then if evidence shows that a BUI can be removed, GLNPO and its partners, the states and non-federal sponsors, will consult the public and see if they agree. And then if so, the beneficial use impairment's removed, and then the monitoring process continues on to make sure that that decision to remove the BUI was correct. And if not, more management actions will be taken. But why, this is an important question, why are we so focused on sediment specifically? So we've got bottom line is that sediment is the foundation for life in aquatic environments. It affects everything in the ecosystem from the ground up. It's the foundation of the food web. And so a contaminated sediment environment, when it's contaminated, the stuff that's at the bottom of the rivers, lakes, harbors, and bays, where the bottom feeders, the benthic organisms, the worms, the bugs, the things that make their home and live in the sediment and are food for the smaller fish that the big fish eat, and then the birds eat the big fish. That contamination accumulates in the sediment, accumulates in the organisms that live there, and then progressively gets higher and higher up through the food chain and food web. And so impacted sediments, those that are affected by pollution, can really negatively affect the community that lives down here in the sediment. So they over time bioaccumulate and then biomagnify up the food web and eventually reach humans at the top. So again, sediment is really the foundation for life in aquatic environments. And so that's why it's so important to invest and partner with companies like US Steel and states and nonprofits like Save the Dunes and whoever is willing to partner with the Great Lakes Legacy Act program to address sediment. It's one of the most foundational aspects of restoring the aquatic ecosystem. So as an example of some of the work that's gone on, I'm showing here kind of the larger puzzle that this project is part of in the AOC. And this figure shows all the different sediment remediation projects that Glenpoe's completed or is currently working on. And the green shading means that the project was completed. Blue means that it's in remedial design phase, and I'll get into a little bit more detail about the different phases of these projects. And yellow means that we're in the investigation phase. And then just for reference too, if you are familiar with Superfund sites and the Superfund program, also an EPA remediation program, the red stars on this map are Superfund sites in the within or near the AOC boundaries. So there's been approximately 2 million cubic yards of sediment that have been remediated in the AOC through a combination of dredging and capping operations. And that's been accomplished through a significant federal and non-federal investment of about $280 million so far. And the project we're talking about today is in this section of the river and is actually incorrectly shaded in this figure. Says AOC project complete. We're still working on it, but it's shaded green because there has been a dredging project that's taken place in this section of the river, but I'll get into that a little bit more detail soon. But first, this is a table showing some of the details of some of these completed projects. The west branch of the Grand Calumet River is over here, where it meets the east branch at the Indiana Harbor and Ship Canal. So the west branch was remediated in 2012, 150,000 cubic yards at a remedial action cost of about 35 million. And then, the other projects here, the East Branch was a significant federal investment in this section right here. And then East Branch Phase 2 near the Gary Airport is still ongoing. And then other projects that I'm working on include the Junction Reaches project and helping out a little bit with the Lake George section of the Grand Calumet River area of concern as well. So yeah, here's the projects that this top one is the one that we're talking about today, and then the other projects that are highlighted here in blue or in yellow. But zooming in a little bit on the project area, the Eastern 5 Miles project area, you can see some of the different components of the project and how we kind of split it up and think about it and talk about it. So starting at the downstream end of the project area, we've got the Pine Station Nature Reserve highlighted in green, with the wetland shelves. The meander wetlands is what we call them in orange. There's dark blue shaded meander riverine wetlands, riparian wetlands. The US Steel CAMU, our Corrective Action Management Unit. I'll talk a little bit more about that soon, highlighted in yellow. The river going upstream passes by the US Steel Gary Works facility and then connects with the Marquette Park Lagoons through a underground culvert. The West Lagoon is on US Steel's property and is separated by this buffer zone highlighted in purple. from the national park, the Indiana Dunes National Park property and the Marquette Park in Gary. And so we've got the west, middle, and east lagoons. And then there's some ponds nearby as well that we call the buffer zone ponds. And just to orient you to, exactly where we are in Gary, we've got the I-90 toll road coming through here, crossing over the river multiple times. And then we've got the Gary Public Library and of course the Jackson family home a little bit further to the south down that way. So there was many industrial and municipal sources that contributed to the present day sediment impacts and how these beneficial uses became impaired in the first place. And so as Northwest Indiana industrialized, many industrial and municipal sources discharged their waste streams to the river. And so this activity simultaneously contributed to the economic boom of the region, but also to the pollution that was experienced and still felt today in Northwest Indiana in the Grand Cal. And so these pictures from the early 1900s demonstrate some of the incredible changes to the natural dune and swale landscape within this project area specifically. So this first one shows where Gary Harbor's turning basin was dredged out to make room for the big freighter ships that come down from Minnesota, hauling the iron ore. And then the second one over here shows how the Grand Calumet River was actually redirected and artificially straightened to make room for the harbor. So you can see the clean white sand and from that time, but obviously looks a little bit different in this section of the river at the moment. But yeah, so that's what it looked like and some of the incredible man-made changes to the natural landscape. But since then, U.S. Steel has conducted a lot of remediation work to restore the river. But before we dive deeper, I want to define some terms here. We've got some acronyms showing up. We've got IDEM, the Indiana Department of Environmental Management, and then RCRA, RCRA, is the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. And so wanted to make sure we're on the same page there. I'll be using those acronyms as we move forward. So under the RCRA Corrective Action Program, I mentioned that big dredging project that went on previously in this section of the river, over 800,000 cubic yards of impacted sediment was removed from the river. And I mentioned the CAMU, the Corrective Action Management Unit, was constructed as a place to put all of this sediment. And there's still a lot of capacity left in the CAMU, and it's going to be a pretty important piece of the puzzle to making the Eastern 5 Miles project successful. If it's eventually determined that more dredging is necessary to address some of the residual contamination that still is present there. And then in addition to the dredging and the construction of the CAMU, there's a groundwater remediation system along the Grand Calumet River, close to the old Coke plant, if you're familiar with that, and I'll point that out next time we bring up a map. And then there's some riverbank restoration and plantings. There's some habitat established, riffle sections placed in the river. And then there was over 200 drums removed from the Western Marquette Lagoon, which is shown here on the left of the screen. And then under IDEM's RCRA closure program, separate from the corrective action program, but closely connected, U.S. Steel capped the former hazardous waste disposal area, which is directly adjacent to the West Lagoon, and is kind of this mound here that you see. It's looks kind of small in this photo, but is actually a massive, kind of hillside that is, former hazardous waste area that has been closed and prevented from, affecting birds and things that would land and graze here. And again, want to emphasize here that the Eastern 5 Miles project is a voluntary partnership between Glencoe and U.S. Steel under the Great Lakes Legacy Act. They're still doing work in the Western Marquette Lagoon through the RCRA Corrective Action Program, but that work can be counted as cost share through the Great Lakes Legacy Act as an in-kind contribution. So they applied to be a non-federal sponsor to the Great Lakes Legacy Act project. So the work that they're doing to take samples and better understand the nature and extent of the impacts to the West Lagoon is able to be used to free up more federal investment from EPA to clean up the rest of the river and to conduct more sampling and to get a better idea of the nature and extent of sediment impacts elsewhere. The project agreement itself is a binding commitment to split the total project costs, again, 35 at a minimum of 35 to 65%, with US Steel picking up the 35 and EPA picking up the 65%. And if the project goes to remedial action or construction, if there's the dredging that happens or capping, this share would increase. US Steel would be obligated to increase their share of the split there. And so after they applied, Glenpo evaluated the technical merits and said that, that's we've got a project here, and under this current project agreement that was signed in 2023, the total project costs are $5 million, with EPA spending $3.25 million and US Steel 1.75, and that's fulfilled through in-kind contributions. As I mentioned, the work that they are conducting to take samples and to provide access to the areas and to clear the areas that are needed to be accessed to take these samples. It's a pretty logistically challenging operation, so their cooperation and assistance is a big help for EPA and their contractors to actually complete the work. So it's a significant contribution. But if that doesn't end up totaling 1.75 billion by the time we reach the next phase of the project, they will also be obligated to provide a cash contribution to true up that to that number. And I also want to emphasize, it's a partnership between Glenpo and US Steel, but it's not just us, the Glenpo and US Steel calling the shots. We've got a lot of project partners and stakeholders that have been continuously involved. We've got the federal partners, the Land Chemicals and Redevelopment Division, who runs the RCRA program, US Fish and Wildlife Service, Indiana Dunes National Park, the Northwest Regional Office of IDEM, and I did see that Michael joined. Hi, Michael. And the Department of Natural Resources. We've got local officials from the city of Gary and Gary Sanitary District attending meetings and reviewing the work products that we're producing through the project, and also tribal partners, the Pogagan Band of Potawatomi, the Miami Tribe of Oklahoma, and the Prairie Band of Potawatomi have all been, consulted through the Section 106 process of the National Historic Preservation Act, as well as their stakeholders attending our meetings, receiving updates, and in the future, as we move into feasibility study, we'll have direct influence in kind of how the project shapes up. So, the goal of the project here is to restore the ecological function of the eastern 5 miles of the river. And so we've talked a little bit about the BUIs, and these ones listed here on the slide are the ones that will be affected directly by the project, and this project will contribute to removing these BUIs from the entire AOC. So we've got restrictions on fish and wildlife consumption. I talked about how the sediment pollution goes up the food web and into the kind of the sporting fish, the type of fish that you might eat. And so there are consumption advisories in Northwest Indiana because of the sediment contamination. So the idea is that through projects like this, that is a direct way to eventually remove those consumption advisories and be able to eat the fish eventually. And then degradation of fish and wildlife populations. By doing projects like this, it'll help the populations rebound. It'll contribute to lessening the occurrence of tumors and other deformities in fish and birds. And then, of course, also the benthos, the little critters that live in the sediment itself. It's a tough, tough living in a contaminated environment like that. So by remediating the sediment, we provide a clean habitat for them to live, as well as other aquatic mammals and things like that, fish, etc. So how's the project really going to go? So it proceeds in phases. The first phase is site characterization, and that was completed in the summer of 2024. And right now we just finished up the remedial investigation field effort in this summer. And so the purpose of those two things is to, kind of, as I mentioned, determine the nature and extent of the sediment impacts based on the historical data. We use the historical data to kind of inform our sampling strategy and fill in the gaps that we can see from the historical data set and get an idea of what's out there. The remedial investigation further fills the data gaps based on this newly collected data. And through this process, we can develop cleanup goals and inform the next phase of the project, which is feasibility study, where we develop and select remedial alternatives. And in some, this is the phase where we figure out what our options are to actually clean up the pollution and the contamination, this impacted sediment. And so then the next phases are remedial design, where we figure out how, once we select the remedial alternative, we design it and say, this is how we're going to do it. And, this is what you would give a marine construction contractor to, you would say, this is how we want you to go out there, and physically, this is where you need to dig. This is how you're going to place the contaminated sediment, that type of thing. And then remedial action is obviously doing it. And then once it's all said and done, you've got to make sure it worked. And that goes back to the BUI monitoring in that, circular flow chart that I talked about. Is the project having the intended effect? And so here, this green line kind of delineates where we are in this current project agreement with US Steel. So that these three phases are what we're authorized to spend $5 million on combined, EPA and US Steel. And then in a future project agreement is where those project costs will go up, and that cost share split will be reevaluated, and then we'd proceed into remedial design and eventually remedial action. And so, as you can see, we're done with site characterization. Field work for remedial investigation is done. The sediment sampling is done. We've got some geotechnical sampling yet to do, but that's we're still early in the process. Is the kind of the take-home message here. So a long way to go yet, but progress being made every day. So this is what the actual characterization investigation involves, the type of samples that we're taking, and the type of data that we use to make the decisions in feasibility study and remedial design. So sediment cores are give us an idea of the depth of sediment impacts. So you can see in this picture here, this tube is put in this metal barrel and lowered into the sediment, and then takes a kind of a vertical column of the sediment. And you can take slices of it and then send that to a lab. They'll analyze it and they'll tell you what's there and in what concentration. And then surface sediment grabs are similar, but just grab like the top layer of the sediment. So difference between these two is you get a better idea of the vertical extent of sediment impacts, whereas on the surface, you just get the superficial layer. Sediment pore water is what's dissolved in the sediment. So here we're looking in these first two, looking at what's in the sediment itself, but in the pore water, this is what's kind of floating around as a result of the sediment contamination. And then surface water is what's in the water column itself. And so difference between surface water and pore water is that pore water is like in between the sediment particles itself, kind of below the mud line, below the surface of the water, or of the sediment surface, that is. Sediment traps are, little kind of, there's a, you put a buoy out there and then extending into the water column and sitting on the bottom of the river, there'd be like a container that would over time fill up with sediment that is suspended in the river and kind of flows down with the river flow. And then as that material accumulates, you can sample that after a time and get an idea of both how quickly the sediment is being transported downriver and the concentration of the stuff that the pollutants, the chemicals, et cetera, that are in the sediment particles. I mentioned we're set to do some geotechnical sampling at the end of this month and proceeding into September. That'll give us an idea of the material strength characteristics of the sediment, and this gives us information about how we handle the material after it's been removed from where it is currently, and then how to place it in its final disposal area. And also gives us an idea about riverbank stability. So if indeed we do need to go out and dig some of this stuff out, dig some of this contaminated sediment out, we want to make sure that the riverbanks stay stable and we're not undercutting the riverbanks and causing them to collapse and that type of a thing. So this is an important source of information for designing the remediation project. Bathymetry is basically like underwater mapping of the sediment surface and gives you differences in elevation and can detect obstructions that would prevent sampling or future remediation efforts. And here's some pictures of what that looks like. We've got some EPA contractors out here on a pontoon boat, and there's kind of like an opening in the middle on the deck of the boat, and so they lower those sediment cores down into the river and then pull them back up and then lay them down and bring them back to the processing area. And then I've got some pictures of what that looks like too in the next slide. This is like a smaller vessel where this one can't fit. They use 2 John boats with like an A-frame attached, and this can take the same types of samples as this one, just a little bit of tighter quarters. And then this one here is how they take those superficial sediment samples, lowering this down into the water column, snaps shut, and then takes that superficial layer back up to the surface. Here we've got that sediment processing area. So we take pictures of the sediment cores after they're split open to kind of get an idea of what the material looks like and kind of the geological properties, the lithology of the sediment cores, and then this is how they take samples of the different depth profiles of the sediment. So we'll split them into like the top foot and then the top foot to the 3 feet interval, and we get a nice idea of how the contamination varies with depth. And here's just a look, this is a pretty busy figure here, but this is what this kind of looks like in practice and where these sample locations are, how we put them on the map. And so just talking through this real quickly, I don't want to spend too much more time. I realize we're been talking for a little while now. We've got historic samples in these gray triangles, and then the circles here are the site characterization samples that you can see that were taken in kind of transects spanning the river. And then all the colorful icons here are what was just collected this summer. So taking samples to better understand arsenic contamination in the river in certain locations based on the phase 1 data, and then sediment cores And again, this kind of transect pattern, continuing along from what was taken in the river and into these wetlands, getting an idea of the vertical extent of impacts in the wetlands here. We've got a sediment trap over here indicated by this white cross. And then that geotech boring is right over here. And then in water geotechnical samples, green square, surface water, co-located with a geotechnical sample there. And then pore water also taken co-located with other samples as well. And then this kind of blue shading is the bathymetry data that I mentioned, those differences in elevation. So this is all, just to say and to demonstrate, kind of the level, the information inputs that we're using to design and make progress on this project. So it's a lot to, it's quite the process to parse through and to even figure out where you need to take these samples. So that's kind of just one snapshot. And another way that we use the data is by comparing the stuff that we take from within the project area itself. So over here to what we call background areas. And so these are areas that are likely not affected as strongly or as over time that haven't had the same level of anthropogenic or the inputs from industry over time as the project area itself. So we've got the Pine Station Nature Preserve, for example, the Ivanhoe Nature Preserve, Long Lake and West and East, which are on the national Indiana Dunes National Park property, and the Little Calumet River, which has been used as background by the Fish and Wildlife Service before. And so we're using some of their data to compare to as well. But these are some of the background locations that we just took this past summer. So I'll get into this a little bit, but I realize that I'm taking quite a bit of time here. So these are the kind of the work products, again, demonstrating what we use to make decisions. We validate the data to make sure that, check it to make sure it's usable for decision making. We want to make sure that the data is of super high quality, that we are making decisions based on the right data, that there's no errors in how the data was collected or analyzed in the lab. And so these types of reports help us describe any issues that might have happened during those processes. Data summary reports kind of interpret what the data means and recommend next steps. And then we also map the data using tools like ArcGIS, Geographic Information Systems, to help communicate the results with our stakeholders and visualize the extent of what we see in the data. So again, just some more of what we're working on right now. We've just created preliminary decision units based on the site characterization results, the phase 1 sampling results that occurred last summer. Conducted an inventory of notable shoreline features, so things that might impact construction activities or remediation activities, property access and permit requirements for this section of the river. And then ongoing work includes a review of the hydrodynamic data, like how water is moving through the area and might impact the sediment and the project in general. And soon we're going to be looking at, this is another ongoing, kind of a desktop study about the surrounding habitat areas. So these riverine wetlands and riparian areas that are adjacent to the project area will be, kind of described, and I will identify future habitat work if necessary. So here is just a quick look at the what these preliminary decision units look like. We've got some, you know, split into a bit of a hierarchy of how we're piecing up the project area. First is zones by these dashed boxes here, then groupings indicated by the colors, and then within each grouping are the individual decision units. And so this is how, we'll be able to understand our sample coverage within each decision unit and evaluate if we have enough information about what the next steps are and whether or not that area needs or action needs to be taken. Also part of the project is you all, is the community, the regional community, the local community. We're working on a community involvement plan at the moment, developing a site mailing list. We have plans for a couple of public meetings in the future as we wrap up the remedial investigation and feasibility studies. We plan to put out public notices of those public meetings and other outreach materials. And then we've been taking lots of pictures at the site that we hope to be able to share more widely as well, kind of the ongoing work. And we'll do that through a project website eventually, and through social media as well, through EPA's Office of External Communication. So here's where we've been and where we're going. It's been since 2022 that the project's been coming together. I talked through a lot of what has been going on the past couple summers, the site characterization field work and remedial investigation. The chemistry data gap sampling I mentioned was just completed in late last month, and geotech sampling set to proceed through September. We're going to be working on analyzing the data in the lab. That takes a little while. And then, as I mentioned, we've got to check that the data is correct, and then write it all up, figure out what it all means. And then all of those, like I said, a lot of information inputs go into the feasibility study. But around this time next summer, we hope to have a public meeting to kind of describe the results of the investigation and kind of the plans for feasibility study. And then following or nearing the end of feasibility study, circle back up with the community and let folks know kind of what our ideas are for how to approach cleaning things up. Sorry, losing control of my slides here. So how to stay updated and involved. I mentioned these two public meetings, and the project website is in the works. We hope to share more about the cleanup status or the investigation status, progress to date, future work, and as I mentioned, photos as well. And so, just to kick things off, I'd love for our discussion and Q&A. I'd love to hear from you about how best we should stay in touch, and your feedback is very welcome. And I'll take that back to the project team and the external communication office too, about how we can keep in touch with you all and kind of the broader community as well. And if you've got specific ideas about who else our project team should be in contact with about to help inform the project and make it the best it can be and have the best impact, please let me know. So I'll leave you again here with a kind of a 10,000-foot view of the project area and my contact information, as well as the contact information for our community involvement coordinators. But I'm happy to stay a while and take your questions. I'll pop my camera back on too.
Thank you, Christian. We do have a couple of questions already in the chat, so we can
all right.
everyone else can percolate on any other questions. Nicole wants to know if one of the photos you shared is from 1907. One of the really old.
I pretty sure. Hold on, I think I might have
Yeah, it said like it was when you had like the two comparisons and
Yeah.
like the dredges, and it said, yeah, exactly. So like it says like July 107, and I'm like, is that 1907 or like
no,
not 18? I mean that, yeah, right. So
gotta be
1907.
1907. Yeah.
Yeah. That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, isn't that nuts? Yeah.
Yeah,
If you want
yeah.
to look, there's some pretty cool pictures. And if you Google this, Indiana University Calumet Regional Archives, you can flip through that photo album. It's really fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it was Save the Dunes just took our interns there to look through things. So highly recommend if any history in the region interests you, the Calumet Region Archives are just a plethora
Yeah,
of information.
yeah,
Okay, another question from Christopher
yeah.
is, it sounds like the Camu or Kimu is being used to store and dry out the contaminated sediment that is dredged. Is there a plan to remove that sediment once it's fully dewatered, or is the Camu designed to durably store it, protected from severe weather events, etc.?
Yeah, so I'm not an expert on the Camu, but you're right to say that, that is you know, it's being contemplated to store the sediment if there is a dredging remedy that'll settled on. And all that, that's another type of in-kind contribution from US Steel that would help free up more federal dollars to be spent to remediate the river. So again, a really important piece of the project. And your question is, is there plans to remove the sediment once it's fully dewatered, or is the CAMU designed to durably store it? Yeah, so this is um, a RCRA regulated and permitted um, hazardous waste landfill. So there's monitoring systems that keep track of, um, emissions and make sure that that there's not leachate happening or anything into the groundwater. And like I said, I'm not an expert on the CAMU and all of its, bells and whistles. So I don't want to, speak incorrectly about it, but it's, one if I had to store contaminated sediment, the CAMU is where I would put it to keep it from migrating elsewhere. And but the idea is that it would be, I believe that once it's full to its capacity, that it would be capped, so that it would be covered over and that the sediment would be kind of buried in place there.
Okay, another question is, has Nippon committed to the partnership?
I I don't know the details of that, but I know maybe somebody also in the chat has a better idea, but what I heard is that I just from news media that they have committed to the deal with US Steel to take ownership, but um correct me if I'm wrong on that
Yeah,
if
hopefully.
somebody's got more information.
Yeah, I think Doreen's probably asking more just about like this project. Like, will the commitment
Oh,
US
I'm
remain after the ownership is
I
transferred?
see, I see. No, I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I assume so, but I can't speak for Nippon or US Steel on that, so you'd have to ask them.
Good question to ask them when that
Yeah,
happens.
definitely.
Um, and then the last question that we have here in Zoom is, are there bivalves in the section of the Grand Calumet? And if so, do they help with remediation?
I actually was just in a meeting this morning about hearing updates from US Fish and Wildlife Service about or sorry, not an area of a program that they're implementing to promote giant floater mussels to help reduce nutrient loading in the Grand Calumet River. And so that is an ongoing project, and they're working to reestablish that population in the Grand Calumet River. And um, they're making good progress, and they're really only limited um, by the rate at which the like nursery can can produce and provide these mussels. So that's an ongoing project. And this is a good environment for those mussels and bivalves to thrive. So um, that you're right on track with that question.
And I do believe that the national park also has a couple of mussel programs and projects in the work too. So I think that they're
100%.
aware of their environmental impacts in the good way of nature-based solutions, I think the mussels are on our good list.
Yeah, and we had to get a uh like a special permit from the Indiana Dunes National Park to sample in the Marquette Park lagoons to make sure specifically that we didn't disturb their mussel reestablishment efforts that are ongoing in the Marquette Park lagoons. So again, so Fish and Wildlife Service is on top of it, and National Park Service is working really hard to reestablish the bivalve population.
Wonderful. And then the last one is just a comment. So, thank you from a lifelong Miller resident that used to canoe and fish in all three lagoons. Are there any plans to lower the lagoon water levels to days of old when the remaining pier in Marquette Park was above water? The higher water levels raised the water table in the area like a number of basements. So,
Hmm.
questions about water table impacts maybe and water level.
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I'm not aware of any plans, and is not really within the scope of this project. Like I said, um we're in the focused on the sediment specifically. I know that some of the Gary Public Works, I believe the engineering department is interested in potentially increasing opportunities for recreation in the Marquette Park lagoons. And so I would direct you to them to learn more about that question and kind of their plans. So we've chatted with them and shared the results from our investigation, the samples we've taken, and kind of the levels of what we've shared our data with them and help them. The intent is to help them with that decision-making process.
Wonderful. And then one more from Doreen. Interested in the benzene groundwater cleanup in the former Coke plant area.
Mhm.
Will the EPA be reporting on the status of those efforts?
Sure, yeah, the EPA will, but that is part of the RCRA corrective action program and is, adjacent to and closely related with the Great Lakes Legacy Act program, but is squarely within their purview. Um, I did mention they've installed that air sparging system along the Coke plant area, and yeah, thank you, Ken. Appreciate you being here. And so that's operating. And what I've heard is that it's, fairly effective at reducing those benzene concentrations, but I don't want to say that for sure. And the sorry, I'm trying to pull up a map here of where I'm talking about. Um, so it's right along this area here. So this is the former Coke plant, and so that air sparge system is, kind of beneath this text. And so that's um, the extent that I know is that that system is operating. What I've heard is that it's being effective at reducing benzene concentrations, but I would not be the one to report on those results. That would be the RCRA Corrective Action Program and or US Steel.
Wonderful. Well, if there's any other questions, feel free. Oh, yeah, people are asking so many questions. That's great.
Yeah, this is awesome. Thank you
This
so
is-
much, everybody.
yeah.
This is great stuff.
Will you explain again how U.S. Steel's in-kind contribution is tracked, how much they have contributed, and who follows up if and when it is met or not?
Yeah, great question. And so this is, part of my job as the project manager, as well as, the financial folks that support the Legacy Act program and the entire Great Lakes National Program office. They uh, US Steel on a quarterly basis reports all of their costs first to our financial side of the house, and they go through it with a fine tooth comb to make sure that they've got all of their numbers straight and everything like that. And then um, once the finance folks have had a look through it, they'll send it to me, and I'll make sure that I recognize all the names of the contractors, that I'm confident that the work that they're reporting actually went on. that the costs are reasonable and not like overinflated or anything like that. And then that is, how we track that. And so it's tracked on my end as the project manager, tracked on US Steel's end very closely. The project agreement that they signed, this, binding commitment to this 35-65% has clauses in it that say you've got to have a really strong and robust financial reporting system, and you can't be party to this agreement if you can't do this on a quarterly basis. You'll report what you've spent, and have it all, check out. And so I want to make sure I address your entire question. Who follows up if and when it is not met, our next step. So yeah, together, Glenpo will let them know, you're under your 35%. The work that your contractors didn't total up to that 35% that you needed. We need some additional cash contribution to make sure that you're holding up your end of the bargain, basically.
Great. There's a question from Noel on, are there efforts to restore aquatic wetland plants after remediation?
There will be efforts, I think. So, one of these areas is the Pine Station meander wetlands. And so we're seeing some, spoiler alert, some fairly high levels of of impacts in this area. And that's evident from, the historical data. So definitely anticipating to see some, aquatic wetland remediation in this area, and then we're looking closely at these wetlands here, as well in the dark blue. But this is all going to be evaluated during feasibility study, and what we've got this habitat summary memo kind of explaining the state of play of what habitat is out there, how it can be improved, and all of that information will be taken into feasibility study and considered. But so there will be efforts, but I don't want to overpromise that we're going to be doing this or that. But certainly on the radar. The wetlands are considered aquatic habitat and have a big impact on these beneficial use impairments. So that's the goal, is to have this project contribute to removing those BYs over time.
Wonderful. All right, well, we're at our 7:30 time, so I'll thank you again, Christian.
Yeah.
Everyone who's joined us, thank you for watching here on Zoom or on Facebook Live. We did get that up and going, so thanks for watching on there. Recordings, as always, for Green Drinks live on Save the Dunes YouTube page, so head over there to check out previous months, and this one will be up shortly as well. And stay tuned for next month. I'm pretty sure, I'm not fully confident that it's going to be Sasha G. Burns from the recycling solid waste management, with some deep dives into recycling and best practices and all that good stuff. So stay tuned, follow us along, and thanks again, Christian, for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks so much to you, Em, and for everybody for your awesome questions. Really appreciated those. And yeah, looking forward to continuing the good work and sharing more with you at a later time.
Thanks so much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you.